Thank you, Chris, and thank you to the governor for great remarks and telling the Commonwealth story, which is terrific. So we welcome that, and I also agree that get to know each other, meet each other at this thing, get out to see New England, and it's a great time of year. Yeah, Chris, it's great to partner with you and Ann is coming up a little later today on this conference and all the good work that you represent, and it's been an honor for the last few years to help you do that. So thank you, and thank you for all you do. We're going to get started here with the three panelists that were introduced quickly. So, Reshma is the head of Vertex, John Fish leads construction, Jonathan Kraft, so you probably know what he does, and you may not like him for it, but we like him for it. But anyway, so we're going to ask some questions that will range from what you all do in healthcare technology development and all that to what we do, some of us in business and things like that, and try and link it together. So we're going to start with Reshma, who was a person who treated patients and did the hard work of helping people get better, and now is the CEO of Vertex, which is one of the world's great companies and one of our great companies and one of the great innovators in pharmaceuticals. So I thought it'd be interesting just to hear a little bit about that personal journey. So you want to talk a little bit about your sort of the shift from a doc to leading a company and how all that happened over the last, it's been 5 years, this is your 5th year, I think, as CEO, right?
Sure thing. Well, good morning, everybody. I was a doctor, and I consider myself a doctor today as well. I just do something different. So the bottom line is I was born and raised in India to a fairly conservative Indian family. And as many of you know who have grown up in that part of the world, there are 3 choices for what you could do for a profession. Doctor is absolutely acceptable, as is engineer. And in our family, the priesthood was the 3rd choice. I was not interested in the latter 2, so medicine it was. I really wanted to be an academic physician. I trained before MGB was MGB. We were partners at that point. But I trained at the Mass General for internship and residency, and then I trained at the Brigham for my fellowship. So this institution, the MGB, I give full credit to for my educational background. And while I did want to take care of patients, I also knew that research was important to me. And so I thought I'd be an academic. I wouldn't necessarily practice in the community, but I would run my lab, see patients, and teach. But what I found out about myself through that process when I was actually doing research is I actually wanted to do research that led to making medicines for patients. And eventually I realized that that meant I would have to go to industry to be at the very front end of that. But it is indeed all of the people and the work that happened right here in Boston and at the MGB that allowed me to do that. And the story basically goes that the chairman of my department, when I was at the MGB, their son was the hiring manager at my first company. That is an absolutely true story. And I picked up the phone because I had some comfort that it was my chairman's son. And that's what led me to pick up the phone, go to my first company on the West Coast. And then I realized how much I miss Boston, amongst other things. And I returned in 2017 to Vertex.
That's terrific. That's a great story. And I'm glad you chose this profession versus the other 2, probably. And the world's better for it, so thank you. I'm going to go down to John Fish. So John is in the construction business around the globe, but he obviously is a native of Massachusetts and has a high interest in what goes on here, chairs the Boston College Board and a lot of things. I work with him a lot. But we heard the governor's pitch about all the great things going on, yet we're in a place that also structurally has to be competitive as a state and attract these companies. And as you think about what you see in other places and here, talk about how, as examples, how this state has to think about itself and its ability to be cost competitive, for lack of better, and compare it to other states, and some words that would actually people could take back to their communities.
Brian, thank you. And I just would say it's an honor and privilege to be here with you this afternoon. And I love this Commonwealth. I feel very, very fortunate. And I think, as the governor pointed out, we're first in many different things. And that's something that I think a lot of Bostonians take a lot of pride in. And as well as our sports teams, especially the Patriots, Jonathan. But when you put all the conversation about sports and other issues aside, and you talk about the core of Boston, there is a high cost of living here. And you cannot escape that. And I often say to people, it's relative. In the past 4 or 5 years, everywhere in this country, costs of housing have gone up anywhere from 15 to 30% at a minimum. Boston has probably gone up about 16%, across the board to 17%. Okay? Groceries have gone up. Education has gone up across the board. So there's no escaping the fact that Boston is a high-cost housing, but on a relative basis, I think it's improved over the past 5 years, which is a very, very important issue. And you think of really the healthcare system and the educational system. Those are the two drivers of our economy here from a principal point of view. And what's happening right now, we have probably about 120 college universities in Massachusetts, have over 750,000 students. And one of the most important things that's happening right now, the intersection of business with our academic and healthcare world, the idea of how do we create the jobs of the future for these institutions that are so important here. And to me, at the end of the day, the idea of business being at the table to help college universities, educational systems, healthcare systems, shape their needs, what they need, is a very, very powerful thing at the end of the day. So I feel right now that Boston is on the precipice. It's playing the long game. Everybody talks about taxes and various things like that, and we acknowledge all that. But at the end of the day, if you take a look at the investments that have been made here and the strength of those investments for ROI for the long term, as we maintain our intellectual capital of the country, we think right now, I don't think there's any better place to raise a family, to educate oneself, and to develop a career opportunity than there is in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And I would say to you, is no matter what the taxes are here from a business point of view, this is the right place to put my bet in the Commonwealth. So thank you, Brian.
So thanks, John. And we're going to go to Jonathan Kraft, who's obviously he and his family have built one of the great dynasties in professional sports, but also have a lot of other interest in and investments in real estates. But Jonathan's been around healthcare for a long time. And so I was going to ask him, you've got a lot of things to do. Why do you spend your time volunteer-wise and interest-wise on healthcare, and how'd you get there, John?
Well, I have the privilege of serving with the two people to my right on the board of the Mass General and Mass General Brigham board system. And we all give it a fair amount of time. And when people ask me about that, my response is, if you care about the community that you live in, and you heard John talk so passionately, when the largest employer in the state, we employ over 80,000 people, the largest provider of health care overall, but then free and subsidized care in excess of $500 million. And then the largest academic medical centers in terms of research, well over $2 billion a year, creating intellectual property, that'll touch hopefully everybody in the world with their impact. If you're privileged to be asked to spend your time helping to maybe be a bodyguard or bring some business knowledge to that environment, it's a real privilege. And so from my perspective, that's why I spend the time I spend with it. I think John talked about a lot of things that are great about this state, and you heard the governor talk about it. But for the first time, I think with the Healy administration and healthcare and the hospitals, you're seeing the executive branch of our state and the power of Mass General Brigham come together to do things like ARPA-H. But we also work together with Bloomberg Philanthropies to get almost $40 million to take the Edward M. Kennedy High School, but it's called the Edward M. Kennedy Academy for Health Careers, and effectively turning it into a technical school for young people that want to come in because it's the industry that dominates this state. And in the past, you just wouldn't have seen things like that happen. So for me, to have the privilege of spending time at things like that, I would do it all day long if someone wanted me.
Well, good. That's terrific, and that's inspiring, Jonathan, to thinking about the personal passion, because at the end of the day, these entrepreneurs and these researchers and are building innovative things, which we're trying to help into the future, and that's terrific. Come back to John. And Jonathan touched on this a little bit, but we're big companies, these enterprises that are up here. How do we think about helping the conditions for healthcare generally, but also the conditions for innovation? I mean, it's not what you and I do for a living. It's not what Jonathan does for a living. It's what Reshma does for a living. But how do you think about how we help create the conditions for healthcare and science to really take place in the community as large company CEOs, and the lessons that might be thought about that?
Brian, as you know, both the Kraft family, myself, and you, and Bank of America, and Fidelity, and quite a few other people are involved, what is called Mass Competitive Partnership. It's a sort of the large businesses in the Commonwealth come together on a monthly basis to talk about Massachusetts competitiveness. I think what's important, what this organization has done, along with other business organizations in the Commonwealth, they're coming together for the first time, speaking with one tongue. How do we, as a Commonwealth, align our thinking to continue to improve our competitiveness, knowing it's a game of inches on each and every day? And right now, the conduit we have as an organization and as the chamber and various other, direct line into the lieutenant governor and the governor. They want business to be successful here. They want to understand clearly what are the obstacles that why businesses can't be successful here. And so to us, to have that type of bond and that type of relationship is pretty powerful. Also, I think what's as important is, too, the idea of the state and the Commonwealth allowing us to work with some of these college universities to provide a sense of outline of curriculum needed for the jobs of the future. And so to us, our entire educational system, higher ed, is geared towards servicing both the entry-level jobs, the medium-type jobs, and the future leadership jobs here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So I don't think there's any better cradle of opportunity from an educational point of view that people can all of a sudden move into business with a very, very strong background and have the skill sets to create value for any particular company. I think, as the governor said as well, too, is that you think about the amount of biotech and life science companies we hear. We're fortunate. We're doing Takeda's world headquarters right now. We're doing a lot of lift in life sciences around here. In the enthusiasm, in the spirit that evolves around those companies, for what currently have now, what the future here is in the Commonwealth, is really, really powerful.
So let's go back to Jonathan, and I'm going to go broaden it back to healthcare. But Jonathan, just on this issue of talent identification, you mentioned earlier the Kennedy Center and how they changed the academic program. You think about the talent development of the future and how you see that from a community perspective and from a business leader perspective.
Well, it's critical. And you heard the governor talk about all of the great things that exist in this Commonwealth and why you'd want to live here. But John also talked about the cost of living in this state, which is not in the bottom half of that around the country. And I think what's really incumbent upon us is to take all the intangibles that are so great about this Commonwealth and give people pathways to be able to make a really good living based on what it is they want to do, but to do it here. And we have so much need for people, not just as doctors and nurses, but in the allied health professions. I can tell you at Mass General, we started back in the early 90s, a program that would go into the public schools in Boston, in Revere, in Chelsea. And we'd start STEM clubs to try to give people that basic skill from people at the hospital and get them excited about the industry. And then we would track these young people through high school, where we have something called an MGH Scholars Program for the kids that might be excited about careers in healthcare. And we would bring them into the hospital in their summers. We'd help them develop if they're interested in management, not just the allied health professions. And whatever it was, but we decided to almost be a real learning center for two reasons. One, if people are given a chance to make a good living, the outcomes, their health outcomes in life and their happiness are greater. But also we understood that there was going to be a shortage probably of talented workers. And a lot of the people go on and work outside of our MGB universe, but we feel as the largest employer in the state at MGB that we have a real obligation in helping to technically train young people in career paths so that they can stay here in the industries that are thriving in this state.
So I think you can ask questions if you'd like, and I think, I don't know exactly instructions, but so you can ask questions. You probably have them at your place, so feel free to do that. They're coming up on iPad if you want to ask the panelists a question. I've got a number more to go, but I just want to make sure people knew they could ask. Reshma, you go to Vertex, a big company now in this universe, a Fortune 500 company, and I get asked this, and my colleagues get asked this. How do you balance that culture that drives innovation to success in a very large company? I mean, in this field especially, because it's among the most innovative fields, and the risk reward on those innovation investments are high. And so talk about how you think about that now, having run a big company now that...
It's a really good question for a company like Vertex, which has become a bigger company. It's a great question for an institution like MGB, which is the largest employer in the state. And it's a particularly interesting question to ask big companies with long cycle times, like biotech or biopharma, where failure is the norm, and where it's going to be a long, hard road to make that transformative medicine that not only is the company trying to make, but patients are eagerly waiting for. I would say that the three things that it comes down to in terms of having that ability to grow from a reasonably small company. So it was not even 10 years ago where Vertex was not yet profitable. It's been in existence for 30 years, but up until 10 years ago, it was not a profitable company. To keep that going, to keep the investments, to bring people into the company and have the people inside the company grow and stay, it is the strategy, and it is the kind of people that you bring in, and then it's the culture. So what do we do in terms of the kind of people we bring in and what kind of culture do we want? We talk very, very openly about the fact that our industry is most likely going to lead to our projects being not successful. It's going to mean being persistent over 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. Obviously, we do things to speed up that cycle time and increase the success rate, but that is the foundation that we're working with here. The other thing we talk very much about is institutional stories. So Vertex had its first medicine actually in 2010. It was the first medicine to go from 0 to $1 billion for the company, but at that time in 2010, it was the fastest medicine to go from 0 to $1 billion. It was also the fastest medicine to go from $1 billion to 0, which happened 1 year later. And so when you talk about innovation and you talk about culture and you're driving for what in all intensive purposes is a near impossible task, you have to think through those stories, hire the right people who have that mindset for wanting to deliver on the impossible, the stamina to do so, and the integrity to pursue this with the highest rigor. But you also have to think about these kinds of institutional stories, and we talk about that to promote this culture of serial innovation.
So when you weren't making money for the first 20 years, or Jeff and the others weren't making money for the first 20 years, it's somewhat easier than when you start making money because the trade-offs become harder. As your investor base has probably switched over the last 10 years, how do you have the conversation with investors that we're going to, we're making money, but we're really going to put a lot over here, and it may or may not be successful? How do you think about that and how those conversations go?
Yeah, I would say that we're very lucky because we have an investor base that's stuck with us even in those 20 plus years of not having revenue and certainly not being profitable. And as we've now moved to a company that has a large presence in cystic fibrosis, an emerging presence, you heard the governor talk about the CRISPR-Cas9 based therapy for sickle cell disease and beta thalassemia. which, by the way, was a partnership between a small company, CRISPR Therapeutics, right here in Massachusetts, and Vertex. And now we're moving on to many more disease areas. Our fundamental value proposition is that we serially invest in innovation to make transformative, if not curative medicines, full stop. That is what we're interested in. That is our strategy. And I think what has helped is the diversification in our pipeline that started around 2015 or so, which was my predecessor. Jeff Leiden, who was the CEO, recognized that despite the fact that we could see that the CF medicines would come and would help tens of thousands of patients, we needed to diversify our pipeline. And that activity started in 2015, and the fruits of that we're seeing now. But that is the entire conversation. We invest in order to make these transformative medicines. And if you want to be a part of this, it's going to take patience. It's going to take a mindset that wants to do the impossible, and it's going to take persistence through what is invariably going to be some number of failures. And our promise is that our strategy is going to increase the odds of success and increase the cycle times.
So, Jonathan, you're an investor in lots of different types of innovative companies, some of which would fit the profile of Vertex's first 20 years developing market share, developing. How do you think about that as an investor in early stage companies and startup companies, not only in health services, but you've invested around the globe? So.
I think what it usually comes down to is management, especially when you're investing early stage. And do you feel the passion that you just heard from Reshma, and the blind tunnel vision, and the can-do attitude, and the grit, especially in a field like developing therapeutics, which is so hard. I knew the original founder and CEO of Vertex, a gentleman named Josh Boger. I invested back then because I believed in him. If I had known Reshma was coming, I would have invested even more. But no, it's true. I have nothing to do with the company. Go buy the stock. And there's no inside info. I want to be clear. We never talk about the company, but I know the woman sitting to my right. That really is what it's about. And I think, those of us who live here and do some investing, we're so lucky to have that concentration of intellectual property between Kendall Square in Cambridge and into the Longwood Medical Center, and then over by MGH and in the Seaport where Reshma is. It doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. And much like San Francisco had it, or the Valley had it in the tech space, certainly at the dawn of the internet era, we have it here. So if you're an investor, you're just gonna, by investing your time here and meeting people, you're gonna meet more people of substance doing interesting things than you are anywhere else. And time is such a precious commodity. I'd be willing to bet, I don't know who the companies are, but there's gonna be a disproportionate share of life sciences companies that hit it big, that are within a 5-mile radius of where we're sitting, than anywhere else in the world.
Most of those people hope it's within the 500 feet of radius where we're sitting.
Okay, that's probably true. That's probably true.
John, once you talk, you've invested in these companies, you've been around this. So as an investor and as a person who runs a private company but still has a shareholder that you have to talk to, how do you think about investing in these companies that are going to show long development cycles, and your advice for these colleagues when they approach somebody like you?
Yeah, Brian, what I would say is, I'm going to turn the table a little bit, is that I think we all know, even as investing, we learn more from losing than we do from winning. You just don't want to lose too much at the end of the day, or too often. And I use an example here in Massachusetts where Jonathan chairs the General, I chair the Brigham, we work together at MGB. We had Dana-Farber Cancer Institute decided to move along, and they're a great institute at the end of the day. And in any other environment, something like that happening would really, really cause a lot of anxiety. And what's going to happen to our overall social infrastructure and healthcare infrastructure if those two systems come apart? But in Massachusetts, what happened was both the Dana-Farber and the Brigham and Mass General looked at that as an opportunity. And we realized, one, and most importantly from the patient's perspective, it was probably in the best interest of the patient because you have two strong healthcare institutions that want to get better and bigger, okay, and provide a more higher level of care than they're currently doing. And so with Ann Clancy's leadership, okay, and Lori Glimcher over the Dana-Farber, all of a sudden you create tremendous opportunity. Two world-class cancer institutes, okay, wanting to be number one, not in the country, but in the globe. So I use that from an investor's point of view. Don't ever not count Boston out. Don't ever count our healthcare systems out, our educational systems out, okay, our financial systems out. Because I believe, and I said this in my first comments, I believe in Boston, we're playing the long game. We're not playing the short game. As Rashmi said, it took the first 10 to 15 years or so, they didn't make any money, okay? We are an industry, we are a culture here of winning, okay? I think our athletic teams demonstrate that, but most importantly, the opportunities like Mass General and Dana-Farber are endless.
So let's move to a trend which is going through all industry and all companies, which is some combination of augmented intelligence, artificial intelligence, digitization, and all different things. And there are different ways it applies in any business. So, Reshma, why don't we start with you and talk about how you think about it, and then maybe Jonathan, you can talk about how you've been a major investor in these digital platforms, but also how you think about it in terms of your role as chair, and Jonathan, John, same things.
I'll give you a perspective from biopharma and maybe focused on healthcare. There is a significant movement, and I would say that it feels different than the technology evolution that came maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago. People will remember in the hospital systems maybe 20 years ago now, the EMRs. It made a difference. You felt like something improved. I remember still when I was a resident, we had pagers in the hospital, and our pagers, when I was a resident, actually could have one line of text. That was a huge innovation, because before that, you just got a number, and you had no idea what you were calling about, or if it was a real emergency, or somebody had the sniffles. So you saw innovation, but I do think this one feels different. The way we're looking at large language models, big data, and AI as a whole is the following. I don't think it is the case that you can expect that there's a basement at the Vertex headquarters or any other company where that's where a target is identified, a molecule or a nucleic acid structure is designed, and the computer tells us exactly what modality to use and to go against which target. That's not how it works. However, we have been using for more than 30 years the human genome, right? The Broad Institute right here, our CSO was one of the co-founders of the Broad, and we've been using genetic information forever. What is genetic information at its core? It's a lot of data. And we use that to identify diseases, to identify potential targets, and to think about how we might design medicines. We use a lot of the internally generated data to feed our own models safety information, preclinical information, liver tox information, so that as we generate new molecules, we have access to all of that data. But a cautionary note is something like this. If you think about generating a medicine in a field where there are no other medicines out there, I'll use cystic fibrosis as an example because that's an area we work in. It's very hard to say that there's going to be a computer that tells you what the CFTR protein structure is going to be, although there is already a computer that tells you that. But you don't know where to go on there. You don't have all of the information because that's proprietary to, in this case, a certain company. And that is an important distinguishing feature. If you say, look, the large language models and the data out there will bring everything up to an average point, I think that that's true. But if you're an innovator and you're doing something that no one has ever done before, the predicate of that is it doesn't actually exist. So perhaps data and tech and large language models will help, but they certainly aren't going to do that without human intervention. So I believe person in loop, person in process will be very important. but it is absolutely, it feels very, very different. And the one place I'll call out where it feels very, very different is in imaging as one example. In genetics and in imaging, it feels very different.
Yep. Jonathan, you obviously invested in the digital revolution across many different types of platforms in your role as on the boards, the chair of the hospital. How do you think about all this? And
I think the most important thing, a lot of things sound and look good on paper, but in practice, when you go to execute on it, it's really people with a great vision who haven't yet really figured out the details and all the machinations of making it work. If you're using a digital platform in a manufacturing business or in a consumer product business to do your marketing and it hasn't figured it all out yet, no problem. The problem, because it's just, you're gonna lose a little money. In healthcare, as we look at some of these solutions, someone's life is on the line potentially, and that's why I think that the adoption in caregiving will be a little slower than you might see in, excuse me, in other industries, because you can't afford to have that mistake. Two really interesting things we're doing at Mass General Brigham. One is, well, they're probably both obvious to most people in the room, but our clinicians are so overworked with paperwork and writing meeting notes and everything else. And now we have over 900 physicians using ambient artificial intelligence. This is after we did a beta where the AI tool is listening with the patient's permission to the conversation with the clinician. It writes up the notes. Our clinician does a quick look and then, hits send. And in a system where we're trying desperately to give our clinicians more face time with the patients and make sure we're being as efficient as we possibly can in a world where costs are going through the roof, that's a really good example of something. The second one, I would say, is something called home hospital, where people heal better at home, they recover better at home. And we have people who would normally have to be in the hospital. We've developed and worked with very small numbers early on, but now we're, I think, up to 50, 60 patients a day who are being monitored at home virtually with technology. The patients experience a safer, more comfortable environment. They're visited every day, and we're seeing much, much better outcomes and quicker recoveries. And those would be two examples of things that I'm really blown away by in our system.
Yep.
Yeah, John, just briefly, thank you, Brian. One is, I think the biggest challenge, in healthcare today on AI is really patient privacy. And I think that, as Jonathan pointed out, it's going to take a little time to sort of ensure that type of program and structure is set up to give the patient the level of comfort and confidence that they have that sense of privacy that they deserve. Secondly, I think in my business, I'm in the real estate construction business. Our goal as an innovator is to create a seamless platform in the built world. And that's to take all these different disparate aspects of the built world and try to put them on a backbone, sort of they connect together. I think that's ultimately what's going to happen in healthcare. How do you have that backbone of artificial intelligence that's taking those disparate aspects of the healthcare system together so they're talking to each other in a much more uniform, seamless way and create tremendous amount of efficiencies? The one last comment I would make is I don't think we have any choice not to experiment with AI. Because the cost of healthcare, the way it's rising today, and it's not going to slow down, how do we innovate in such a way that we can improve patient care and lower total medical expense? The only way to do that is come up with innovation. And I'll close by saying this. There is no doubt in my mind, if anybody is going to leverage AI in a cost-effective way, an innovative way, it's going to be in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We welcome you to join us.
Thank you. So we're going to close, and thank you for your time and attention. Thank you to Jonathan, Reshma, and John. We gave you a little bit of Massachusetts, a little bit of business, and a lot of healthcare of a company that many of you hopefully can emulate and imitate and become like in your careers. So thank you to my panelists, and thank you all for joining us, and I'm going to turn it back to Chris.